In what ways does your media product use, develop, or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? My media product of an opening sequence film uses forms and conventions of real media products in a number of ways to establish setting, characterization, narrative, visual style, genre, and ideology.
After researching other films in a similar genre to what we wanted to achieve, of drama thrillers such as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Salt, and Paranormal Activity, we noticed that there is an inequality between genders. This general convention is one that we wanted to explore further, especially after gathering the data from our questionnaire that we had previously handed out, which explained that our target audience, males and females aged 26, enjoyed the genre of drama thrillers the most. We also conducted interviews, and the most popular genre was thrillers. This primarily found knowledge about our target audience persuaded us to go into more depth to conform to the typical conventions in which most drama thrillers convey, in the hope that our film will be intriguing to our target audience as the other films in the same genre.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith, one of the films we researched in our planning stages, expresses some inequality between genders. I took inspiration from this to interpret into our own product. We decided to conform to the stereotype about women being vulnerable and inferior to men by the mise-en-scene and choice of costume. We placed the female character, or the protagonist, in a lighter coloured top to try and highlight her innocence and youth, and also a shorter skirt to convey the fact the man may take advantage of her. This enhances her role as the protagonist. The male antagonist is dressed in a stereotypical dark tracksuit to enhance his overpowering role as the antagonist, which is also conveyed through low-angle shots. This use of mise-en-scene makes the audience feel as though they need to side with the protagonist, leading to the conclusion that she is the vulnerable character in the product.
During our research, we also watched the film Titanic, which was set in 1912, at a time when women were considered socially inferior to men. This is shown through a number of conventions, such as the fact that the female character, Rose, isn't allowed to talk much and wasn't allowed to participate in male activities such as poker. This gender inequality ideology was very interesting and helpful when we wanted to explore it in our own opening sequence, as we could attempt to conform to the typical old-fashioned stereotypes about gender more accurately. In the early 1900s, the suffragettes and the suffragists were two women suffrage parties who were aiming to gain the right to vote because they wanted to be equal in their qualities to men.
The time and location I set my piece in also shows how my media product uses conventions of media products. My research suggested that films within the same genre are commonly filmed in dark, eerie places to convey a sense of fear. I chose a location of a club to begin with to set the time of night. The style of club is intentionally run down, which works well with our narrative, as it portrays that something illegal or bad could happen later on in the sequence. This in turn leads audiences' expectations of the film so that they understand the narrative further. I then chose a dark alleyway, specifically because after the research I found that my target audience would associate this connotation of place of crime, therefore conforming to stereotypes. These first two locations are common locations and times in which illegal crimes take place. As this mise-en-scene conforms to stereotypes, it can lead the audience's expectations about the narrative of the piece, and therefore their reactions will be as they expected, and this doesn't challenge their expectations as viewers. I finally chose a dark part to choose to film, as an effort to challenge and subvert ideology stereotypes, as a part can be associated with virtue and infancy of children, but in this case I have decided to use that innocence to reflect the innocence of the female protagonist. The fact she is approached walking through a park enhances her own vulnerability and youth. This makes the audience think deeper about the situation and the fact that maybe she doesn't want to get caught up in this more adult-like situation, which reflects her young age further.
As an attempt to differentiate our product from the general conventions, we conveyed the dialect of the female protagonist to be well-spoken and more formal vocabulary with a posh regional accent. This would challenge the audience's expectations slightly, as they would expect the female character to be more common, and perhaps no more well-spoken than the male. This use of mise-en-scene could give her more power, as her choice of language highlights her innocence further, specifically as she doesn't use colloquial language like the antagonist does, subverting the current stereotypical views about the types of people who take illegal drugs at the same time as keeping the audience's interests.
Here is some screenshots from the film Mr. and Mrs. Smith. This screenshot displays the height difference of the characters, and as you can see we have tried to use this in our own sequence. We have positioned the female as though she is looking up to the man, which is also displayed in the film Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which makes the female inferior to the man.